Hello and welcome. I am the CEO and co-founder of We Connect International, a global nonprofit created by many of the world's largest buyers, committed to buying more products and services from women-owned businesses around the world. I'd like to thank the organizers of the International Humanitarian Summit for bringing us all together. In today's session, we will explore what efforts private and public organizations need to make to bridge the gender gaps and what is necessary to create an inclusive environment for women within society. We are honored that Her Excellency Wadad Ahmed Bu Hamid has joined us today to frame this session theme, Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment, in a keynote address. Her Excellency is the Director of the Government Communication Department at the UAE's Ministry of Health and Prevention. She is a human rights activist, serving as the Vice President of the Emirates Human Rights Association of the UAE, and also as UAE's Ambassador of the International Women's Society in the UAE, and a member of the International Commission of Jurists, the International Organization Equality Now, and the UAE National Committee to Combat Human Trafficking. Welcome, Wadid. We're very much looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. سيدات والسادة الكرام، الحضور الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسعدني ويشرفني اليوم أن أشارك في المنتدى العالمي للأخوة الإنسانية بحضور نخبة متميزة في هذه الجلسة، وكذلك أنقل لكم تحيات مجلس إدارة وأعضاء جمعية الإمارات لحقوق الإنسان. اليوم نشارك في هذا الحدث الدولي الذي تنظمه وزارة التسامح والتعايش مع اللجنة العليا للأخوة الإنسانية تحت رعاية معالي الشيخ نهيان بن مبارك آل نهيان وزير التسامح والتعايش، ونشارك العالم احتفالاته باليوم العالمي للأخوة الإنسانية ضمن المبادرة التي قدمتها دولة الإمارات إلى جانب شقيقاتها السعودية، البحرين ومصر، وقررتها الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة في ديسمبر الماضي ليغدو 4 فبراير من كل عام يوماً عالمياً للإنسانية. تواصل دولة الإمارات تسجيل حضورها الإنساني وتمضي بثبات في ترسيخ مبادئها ونشر قيمها الأصيلة في ظل تصاعد الأزمات العالمية، حتى غدت الإمارات منصة لإطلاق واحتضان المبادرات التي تعنى بالجوانب البشرية، إيماناً منها بأهمية دورها الإنساني وثقة بمكانتها الراسخة بين الأمم. حقيقة لم تكن مساهمة الإمارات في صياغة وإطلاق المبادرة ترفاً أو رفاهية، بل جاءت ترجمة حقيقية لحرصها على ترسيخ هذه القيمة المنبثقة في الأصل من هويتها وتاريخها الحضاري. العامر بمواقفها الإنسانية، الإمارات كانت من أوائل الدول التي سعت إلى تفعيل الحوار الحضاري واحتضنت الآخر وتقبلته ضمن مبدأ التعايش المشترك كأحد المقومات الأساسية في المجتمعات لضمان نبذ العنف ومواجهة خطاب الكراهية والتعصب الديني والتمييز. السيدات والسادة، على الرغم من غياب العنف ضد النساء كظاهرة في الإمارات، إلا أن الدولة حرصت على سن القوانين والتشريعات التي تحفظ الحقوق وتصون الكرامة وتمنع أي انتهاك جسدي أو جنسي أو معنوي لمخالفته للشرائع السماوية وتجاوزه للأعراف والقيم الإماراتية بالأساس وانتهاكه بالطبع للقوانين الدولية. بتتبع مسيرة دولة الإمارات نجدها من أوائل الدول في المنطقة التي أصدرت في منظومتها التشريعية عدة قوانين منها تشريعا لمكافحة الاتجار بالبشر من خلال إصدار القانون الاتحادي لسنة 2006. حرصت الإمارات على الانطلاق من قاعدتها الراسخة في تجريم العنف ضد المرأة لتكون شريكا عالميا عبر الانضمام إلى مجموعة أو جميع الاتفاقيات الدولية ذات الصلة المباشرة وغير المباشرة بحماية المرأة وحماية حقوقها بمختلف أشكال وأنماط الحماية وجبر الضرر. على سبيل المثال وليس الحصر، انضمام الإمارات إلى الاتفاقية الدولية للقضاء على كافة أشكال التمييز العنصري في 1974، ثم اتفاقية حقوق الأشخاص ذوي الإعاقة في 2003، والتي قد تكون المرأة في دولة الإمارات أحد الحالات التي تشملها بالطبع هذه الاتفاقية. كذلك الانضمام إلى الاتفاقية الدولية الأكثر شمولية وتخصصاً للمرأة وهي اتفاقية سيداو، القضاء على جميع أشكال التمييز ضد المرأة، بالإضافة إلى عدد من المواثيق الإقليمية ومنها مصادقتها على الميثاق العربي لحقوق الإنسان الذي أقرته قمة تونس في نفس العام. عالمياً ترتبط الإمارات بشراكات طويلة الأمد مع هيئة الأمم المتحدة للمرأة منذ تأسيس الهيئة في 2010. كانت الإمارات عضواً في المجلس التنفيذي لهيئة الأمم المتحدة للمرأة من 2013 إلى 2018، وشغلت منصب نائب رئيس مجموعة آسيا والمحيط الهادي ورئاسة المجلس التنفيذي أثناء كذلك هذه الفترة. الحضور الكريم، الإنجازات اللي حققتها المرأة حتى اليوم تترجم نهج واستراتيجية دولة الإمارات ومكانتها العالمية كبيئة حاضنة ونموذج فريد للمرأة الإماراتية القادرة على تحمل مسؤولياتها الوطنية وتأدية دورها إلى جانب أخيها الرجل لرفع راية الإمارات. ولم تكتفي الدولة بسن القوانين والتشريعات التي تحمي المرأة فحسب، بل وفرت لها بيئة تحفيزية باعتبار المرأة أحد أهم محركات النمو والازدهار. انطلقت العديد من البرامج والمبادرات الهادفة إلى تمكين المرأة في مختلف القطاعات والمجالات. عند الحديث عن جهود دولة الإمارات الخاصة بدعم المرأة على الصعيدين العربي والدولي، لابد من التوقف والإشادة بمبادرات وجهود سمو الشيخة فاطمة بنت مبارك رئيسة الاتحاد النسائي، الرئيس الأعلى لمؤسسة التنمية الأسرية، رئيسة المجلس الأعلى للأمومة والطفولة، كونها نصير المرأة على مستوى محلي ولها إسهامات كذلك مشهودة دوليا، حرصا منها على دعم وتمكين المرأة. وجهت بأن يكون 28 أغسطس من كل عام هو يوم احتفاء بالمرأة الإماراتية، وخصص 28 أغسطس يوما للمرأة الإماراتية. كذلك تم إطلاق الاستراتيجية الوطنية لتمكين وريادة المرأة، والتي توفر إطار عام للقطاع الحكومي والخاص ومؤسسات المجتمع المدني لوضع خطط وبرامج عمل تسهم في جعل دولة الإمارات من خلال المرأة في مصاف أكثر الدول تقدماً لتمكين المرأة وريادتها. بإشارة سريعة إلى دور المرأة ومكانتها في مجال العمل السياسي، نجد أن مجلس الوزراء الإماراتي يضم الآن 32 وزيراً، بينهم 9 نساء بنسبة 27% من مجموع الوزراء، محققة الإمارات بذلك أعلى معدلات في العالم. كذلك تم رفع نسبة تمثيل المرأة الإماراتية في مقاعد المجلس الوطني الاتحادي إلى 50% في انتخابات 2019، وذلك بتوجيهات من صاحب سمو الشيخ خليفة بن زايد حفظه الله. هذه هي دولة الإمارات باختصار، تقدم نموذج عالمي في تمكين وحماية المرأة ودعمها في شتى المجالات، يترجم هذا صدارتها في عدد من المؤشرات العالمية المتعلقة بدعم المرأة. الإمارات حلت بالمركز الأول عالميا في مؤشر إغلاق الفجوة بين فجوة الأمية بين الجنسين، والأولى عالميا في حقوق الملكية بين الجنسين. كما حلت الدولة المركز الثاني عالميا في مؤشر المساواة في الأجور بين الجنسين، والثاني عربيا في تقليص الفجوة بين الجنسين. يعود الفضل في تحقيق هذه المؤشرات إلى دور ومبادرات مجلس الإمارات للتوازن بين الجنسين في جميع ميادين العمل وتقليص الفجوة بين الجنسين وتحقيق التوازن بينهم في مراكز صنع القرار، تحقيقاً لرؤية الإمارات بأن تكون ضمن أفضل 25 دولة في مؤشر التوازن بين الجنسين بحلول هذا العام 2021. كذلك تدعم المؤشرات الوطنية المرتبطة برؤية الإمارات 2021 مثل هذا التلاحم المجتمعي ومؤشر السعادة، إضافة إلى كونه أداة دعم المؤشرات الوطنية المتعلقة بالتوازن بين الجنسين. كما أن المجلس يعمل على وضع خطة استراتيجية بعيدة المدى في ملف التوازن بين الجنسين، وتماشيا مع توجهات الدولة للاستعداد لل50 عاما القادمة من خلال وضع مبادرات رائدة في التقارير الدولية والعمل لما بعد إغلاق الفجوة، بحيث تصبح دولة الإمارات وجهة عالمية لأفضل الممارسات في ملف التوازن بين الجنسين للمشاركة في عملية التنمية المستدامة والوصول بدولة الإمارات لقائمة الدول الأولى في المؤشرات العالمية للتوازن بين الجنسين. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for those enlightening remarks. There are many ways to think about gender equality and women's empowerment. From my perspective, driving more money into the hands of women to empower them economically is a necessary requirement to achieve equality. Economic growth depends on women, yet there are many barriers to women in the labor market as leaders and as entrepreneurs, and that's why I think women's economic empowerment is so important. The pillars of women's economic empowerment include equitable opportunity. At We Connect International, we focus on women as business owners, and we want to find them with our partners, train them and certify them as women business owners, and connect them to actual buyers. Today, I'm joined by 4 panelists who are some of the world's experts on gender equality and women's empowerment from the UAE and beyond. And I'd like to ask them what they see are the priorities as we strive for gender equality and to meet the goal of SDG 5. On norms and culture, I'd first like to invite our distinguished panelist, the Honorable Irina Bokova, to set the scene. Irina was the first woman to act as the Director General of the UN Agency for United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, also known as UNESCO, where she was engaged in the UN efforts to adopt Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and is currently a member of the High Committee on Human Fraternity and President of the Academy for Cultural Diplomacy. Irina, you have promoted culture as a driver for sustainable development. And given your global view, what have you seen work to influence culture in support of women's economic empowerment?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for this question. And of course, my gratitude goes to the Ministry of Tolerance for inviting me to participate in this conference in such a auspicious day the International Day for Human Fraternity that was just announced by a decision of the United Nations General Assembly. And I think it's also extremely important and very symbolic that we speak about gender equality and culture, particularly in this day. And of course, thank you for the question, because you mentioned United Nations Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, where we see on one side, of course, gender equality as one of the objectives, but also the goal number 5, but also let me emphasize that for the first time, culture was integrated in this agenda in its 2 dimensions. On one side, as an enabler for sustainable development, because we know that without having the cultural context, we would not be able to mobilize communities, societies around a certain vision of humanity. But on the other side also, because culture, cultural industries, creative industries, as we call them very often, linked with the diversity, heritage protection, partnerships, are indeed a very strong reason for growth, for social inclusion, and also for more peaceful and sustainable societies. When we speak about gender equality in culture, I would say that gender equality in culture is not immune to the inequalities and discrimination that permeate other areas of societies, and is influenced by a broader context that include other areas of social categories such as class, race, poverty, ethnicity, religion, age, disability, you name it. And this all compound disadvantages. But also, it is important to mention that gender equality is also recognized as a core development goal, and this is extremely important, and human right. So I would not like to dwell, because we don't have time, but issues of gender equality and human rights has been on the agenda of many debates. Just let me say that cultural diversity, and there are many reports of the United Nations Reporter on Cultural Rights. There is an important document at UNESCO adopted in 2001, the Declaration, the Universal Declaration of Cultural Diversity, which know that cultural diversity is fully compatible with human rights. And indeed, they constitute together an ingredient for building this future, the future we want. And it is important because the respect for human dignity in all its diversity, including gender equality, is founded on equality and non-discrimination. And this is the very basis of human rights. Now, when it comes to culture, I would like to say that during my tenure at UNESCO, we made an extremely interesting report with statistics, with opinions from member states, which was about gender equality and culture, including heritage protection. And what we found in this report is that what hampers, what impedes more involvement of women and true gender equality in culture, first, of course, is no data, no disaggregated sex data, reliable research data in order to see what actually is the current situation and what should be done. There is an absence of gender on impact assessment. There were no monitoring mechanisms. There is no mainstreaming globally of gender into cultural policies, of plans and legislation in different countries. There is lack of targeted training and capacity building, and unequal access to decision-making role in cultural professions. And here, I think the disparity is huge. So on that basis, there are a number, and we at UNESCO and other organizations have made a very interesting research on actually what happens and how we may remedy this situation. And I'm not speaking only on the last and most important, maybe, reason for this disparity, which is lack of access to credit and financial resources and allocation to women. We know the problem is huge, not just in cultural industries, but wider. So we know, for example, and OECD and some of the developed countries have made a research and say that albeit more females than males study creative arts subjects, it's all across the board. If you go to university and arts and cultural, it's full of very motivated young students and young women. But a very much smaller proportion go to creative jobs after graduation. So why it is happening, and how can really employers and universities remedy this situation? We just have to change the, I would say, the perception that creative industries are traditionally male spheres. We know that also from the some of the technology companies, which are also part of these creative industries, where the women confront such barriers. And we know that wider, there is a lack of women at decision-making positions. So because there are no role models, which is the second, very strong impediment. Young girls do not see themselves as following this. And it's very interesting that just in the UK, there was such a study where 88% of these young students and girls were feeling there are no role models. 88%, it's extremely high for that. And also, they have never worked, 70% have never worked with a woman creative director in some of these conditions. Then, of course, it's the prevalence of male culture in many of these organizations, which are very different, masculinized working cultures, which embed gender norms and constructions of such kind of a creative person as a masculine subject. I think there should be enormous need to change this. And also the prevalence of, say, employment of in creative roles, which is also seen very much as a masculine kind of an approach. So to end my presentation, because I know I spoken a lot, but I think really universities play a critical role to prepare and to change this. We need to provide role models. We really need to work on the financial aspect and how to finance such startups and such projects, and overall to change the stereotyping of women in creative industries as being only employees and not the leaders. I think this is very important. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Irina. What a perfect end to a fascinating conversation on norms and culture, but that women actually, have the ability to run the organizations that we're talking about and rethink how we do business and how we engage in culture and what norms are. And so lots to think about on that particular topic. And I know we have, so many other issues that fit into this, including workplace gender equity. And I'd like to talk about and look at women in the economy and address the workplace gender gap with Simona Scarpaleggia, who is the global CEO of Edge Strategy. Simona, in addition to your many accomplishments at IKEA and other places, you served as the co-chair of the UN High-Level Panel for Women's Economic Empowerment, reporting to the UN Secretary General. And you are such a staunch advocate for workplace gender equity, and at Edge, you focus on narrowing the gap in representation, pay equity, equitable career flows, and inclusiveness at culture of employers, some of which are the largest companies and multinational organizations in the world. We work with many of the same corporations, and I had the good fortune to get to know you when we were on the UN high-level panel together. But working with companies like Accenture and SCB and Chevron and Dow and L'Oreal and many others, we support their external inclusive sourcing efforts within procurement, but you work on their internal gender equity efforts. How far have these types of employers come, and what are some of the largest remaining barriers? Thanks, Simona.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to this very compelling conversation. I was thinking it is probably no coincidence that the companies that you mentioned are both WeConnect and Edge clients. in fact, they express a commitment and in closing this gender gap and in capturing the great benefits that derive from a more gender balanced workplace. So at EDGE, we help organizations transforming their workforce by measuring, accelerating, and certifying gender equality. And we do it through a rigorous and respected methodology that is based on data. And when you start, you know very well, Elizabeth, when you start looking at data, then things really become very, very serious because it's fact-based and you can follow up and you can see progress. We analyze the representation of women at all levels of the organization. We verify the status and the gaps against equal pay for equivalent work. We analyze policies and practices of the organization for hiring, promoting, retention, and pay. And we also evaluate the employee perception of the inclusiveness of the company culture. So with this holistic approach, based on big part of quantitative data, but also qualitative data, we can determine which are the gaps against the standard for gender equality. And we can provide in this way specific actions per addressing each of these gaps that the companies can decide when and that with timing and with which prioritization to start with it and implement in order to close this gender gap. The outcome of this are pretty clear. If we look at the average KPIs of companies globally in the normal statistics that you get, for instance, from the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, you can see that women in the workforce in EDGE certified company are 6 points more than women employed in the workforce globally. That women on boards, we have now 21% of women on boards on average. The EDGE certified companies are already at 33%, and women in senior management positions, C-level, are at 33% against 18% of the global average. So by showing this commitment and acting upon it, of course, you get to progress, and let alone all the KPIs related to hiring, to retention, to promotion and pay, where also the EDGE certified companies are in a better place. So this means that when you make the gender equality or a gender balanced workplace a strategic priority and measure, then things happen. There are still some barriers. So companies sometimes struggle with tools, and of course these tools have to be provided, and also some infrastructures could be of great help both to men and women to support them in a very good way to thrive in the workplace. I would like to conclude also with a reflection. We are in the middle of this pandemic that has, on one hand, hit women very heavily. We see old statistics coming up. The most of the work or the jobs have been lost by women, mainly because they couldn't handle during contemporary two things: taking care of the family and taking care of their job. And this is very dangerous, and we really have to be alert and to mitigate this. But on the other end, the other side of the coin, alibis are gone. It is possible to work in a more flexible way. One time, the point was, it's something that we have to do to help women. Now everybody's working flexible. We see it works. We see areas of efficiency, and this can be really the signal that we can reset the way we work in a way that is better both for men and women.
Simona, thank you so much for sharing your experience in workplace gender equity. There are so many aspects to this, and I know it's hard to highlight the few that you're working on now over at Edge. But I'm really grateful for the work that you continue to do in support of equity and equal opportunity. So thank you for sharing that. Now I'd like to talk about the issue of representation and voice. And our next panelist, Noa Hefny, is a serial founder at the forefront. She's a founder and CEO of People of Impact, and also the co-founder of Lit Creative, a marketing communications and social impact consultancy agency, and co-founder of She Is Arab, the first dedicated speakers platform for Arab women in the world. She's also been in the corporate world and over at the UN. Noa, your work has strengthened the representation and voice of women. In 2020 on medium.com, you said, "I'm inspired by the countless success stories of women role models that aren't visible and the possibilities to shine a light on them to help more women make better choices so they can navigate their own leadership journeys." So what are some of the most effective ways to bring that much needed exposure and visibility to women's achievements? Noa?
Thank you so much, Patricia, for the introduction. And I'm also grateful. I'd like to express my gratitude to the Ministry of Tolerance and Coexistence for including me in this amazing summit and with such wonderful panelists. I'm really honored to be here. And I'd like to start my comments on voice and representation by saying that progress on gender equality cannot be realized without tapping into the full potential of women. This is an economic and strategic opportunity where visibility and exposure become important enablers for success. So when we talk about visibility and exposure for women, oftentimes, we think about it in the PR sense or personal branding, etc. But I think we need to move beyond that to see it as an enabler for greater representation and more access to opportunities. So if we frame it in a specific context and look at the data relating to representation, we'll see that representation figures remain very low, and they're likely to further regress as a result of the pandemic. And to mention a few facts here, although some of my fellow panelists have already covered some relating to women on boards and in the C-suite, I'll cover others. So 6.6% of CEOs globally are women, 24.9% of parliamentarians globally are women, with only 4 national parliaments globally that achieve gender parity so far. And here I want to stop and really say that I'm very proud as a UAE resident to be in one of those countries that achieved gender parity in parliament. And I think, it will continue on many other fronts. Another very interesting fact in relation to media and exposure and visibility is that 24% of persons heard, read about, or seen in the media are women. So 24% is a very low number that really needs improvement. And actually, interestingly, this number was referenced in a study from 2015, which shows that also data and research around this particular subject is not really happening or advancing. So I think we need greater attention to this fact and looking at the correlation between visibility, exposure, women's voices, and representation. So obviously, when we look at the total workforce or labor force participation, the numbers have been stagnating for the past 20 years at 39% in 2019. So now when we look at this picture, we could always look at a very bleak outlook, but I think this is an opportune time, especially with the pandemic, to advance multi-sectoral collaborations, to raise the voices of women and bring them the much needed exposure in their leadership journeys. So some of the practical ways that this can be done include increasing the voices of women in the media, in speaking events, in professional networks, and highlighting role models, which was mentioned by Her Excellency Irina earlier, sharing success stories, and I would also say learnings along women's leadership journeys, because we tend to focus on all the successes, but I think there is a lot of value in sharing stories of failure and bouncing back, the resilience of women across different experiences. And I think that can change the situation for younger women, enable them to avoid certain barriers that we've all already experienced. I think it can inspire, it can transform mindsets, and more importantly, it can eliminate stereotypes and discrimination. So another thing that's really important, and this I experienced firsthand while co-founding a startup, She's Arab, representing and addressing the underrepresentation of Arab women in leadership and panel parity, actually, is that one of the main challenges is women themselves. So for example, there is a great need here on positioning programs for women leaders, training on communication, and for example, public speaking, to enable the women to have more effective delivery of their messages so that their voice can be heard in an effective manner. And this is, a call for action for businesses, for the public sector as well, for women networks, for enterprises that are working with women. Another really effective and practical way is really celebrating and recognizing the achievements of women through awards. Oftentimes, women see the awards, they don't necessarily get encouraged to nominate themselves because in many cases they question or doubt the level of their achievements. But I have to say that if you know an accomplished woman who has achieved great things, encourage her to nominate herself, to get recognition for her work, or nominate her yourself. Unconscious bias in the workplace and in society is a key challenge, and I think it's the one that might take the longest time to address, because it's hard to change mindsets and culture. And here, we need a lot of training, education, awareness, and we need also, more importantly, a tone at the top by male champions of diversity, of gender equality in workplaces and in the public sector as well. And we also need tools on those types of trainings. When I was advising on gender equality, oftentimes I didn't really find a lot of reference material on how to actually, train or develop capabilities in this area. We have to review recruitment, promotion, and development practices, ensuring they are gender sensitive. We have to build more inclusive workplaces, and in turn, that will lead to more inclusive societies and hopefully a more equal world. Gender-sensitive language is another very interesting topic that is not broadly researched in terms of women's voices and women representation and communication, within workplaces in an inclusive way. So we need to look at that. What kind of language are we using in our marketing, in our communication? Auditing our practices to ensure that they do not reinforce stereotypes. And here, on this unstereotyping point, I'm very proud that also recently UN Women in the UAE has launched a wonderful partnership with the private sector to eliminate stereotypes in marketing and advertising against women, and to ensure, that there is no discrimination as a result. Other points that I wanted to make is that, leadership is very important. We need bolder commitments to give women voices and visibility. We need to drive gender balance representation numbers, and that will only happen through the commitment and the bold aspirations by leaders in both private and public sectors to commit to at least 30% representation in leadership, and in the total workforce at 50%. Encouraging women, so buying from women and looking at gender sensitive procurement, investing in women. So I'm an entrepreneur at the moment, social entrepreneur. Globally, women-led business only gets 4.3% of venture capitalist funding. This has to change, and enabling us to really advance the dialogue and the action on gender equality for a better and more resilient world and recovery is very important. So investing in women and and investing in women in the community as well who are disadvantaged, so we do not leave anyone behind. Planning and decision-making and budgeting should also be gender sensitive and put women at the forefront of all decisions that are going to impact their future, because that will also drive visibility and exposure. And last but not least, I think there's a great opportunity through technology to amplify the voices of women, particularly those in marginalized communities, giving them access. There are currently billions that are not accessing the internet. They will be left behind on education. They will be left behind on their voices being echoed. And so any business or public sector entity that can support this would be unlocking a great opportunity. So in closing, I'd like to say that women's voice must be at the heart of recovery and decision-making in the future, now and in the future. And while the pandemic has hit us hard, or the hardest, and is widening the inequalities, this is an opportune moment for cross-sector collaboration to build more equal, tolerant, resilient, and balanced societies. And I want to say that the progress on gender equality cannot be realized without tapping into the full potential of women. This is an economic and strategic opportunity. I think McKinsey labeled it at 28 trillion, if I recall the number, but I'm not sure, I'll double check. But again, it's an economic opportunity that must be unlocked, and where the visibility and exposure are really critical enablers for success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noah, for your passion for women's representation and voice, and for giving them platforms to do that. It's really powerful. And I want to ensure that we also touch on the critical role of education and how we tie it all together. And to do that, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Aisha Abdullah, Vice President for Academic Affairs and Executive Dean of Business at Higher Colleges of Technology, HCT, in the UAE. Aisha, you have been recognized as one of the Middle East's best CEOs. You played a key role in making Dubai an international city, especially regarding health and education. And under your leadership as Managing Director of Dubai Sciences Cluster, a healthcare free zone was established, growing to a community of 90 medical centers, which is just incredible. And under your leadership as Dean, the Higher Colleges of Technology Faculty of Business won an award for excellence in development of the country's future business leaders. So to build on the points made by Irina about culture, can you give us the perspective from the UAE? What culture shifts need to happen for gender equality to be achieved in education?
First, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this really fantastic panel and timely panel. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Ministry of Tolerance for organizing this conference. When we think about culture and the impact it has on gender equality, I think especially in the area of education, as all of you know, is a transformational, brings about transformational change in anybody's life, and more so in women's life. I'd like to just take a step back and just take you through how the UAE in less than 50 years has been able to transform itself as a country. And the way they did this was through education. This transformational change happened because of a strategic intent of the founding fathers of this country, and especially Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, who was the father of this nation and the first president of the United Arab Emirates. He was a visionary leader and a social entrepreneur. So what he started was a very unique social experiment. This experiment was to change the attitudes of the families towards education, especially educating their young daughters. So what he did was he removed all the hurdles for sending children, both male and female, to school. And he provided them incentive. It was everything from a monthly allowance for these parents. And remember, these parents are, not educated parents. So for them even to see the value of education, these incentives were very powerful. So they got monthly allowance. The children were given food in school, breakfast in school. They were given free uniforms. They were given free transportation. And they were also, of course, education was free for all. And what happened also, there were schools that were built in every neighborhood. And in these neighborhoods, people were invited to come to the schools. And it was not only for the young children that went to these schools, but adult education started also. And this is where, of course, women, being resourceful as they always are, they disproportionately benefited from these adult education. So in a span of a decade, this country has been able to pivot education and increase the literacy rate substantially. And this social experiment, of course, then fed into where we are currently in higher education. And I'm very pleased to say in the UAE, we have a reverse gender gap when it comes to higher education. So what I mean by reverse gender gap is that over 70% of the university population in all our federal institutions of higher education, as well as private, are women. And the male students are disproportionately and not as well represented. So for example, higher colleges of technology, which is the largest federal higher education institution in the country, that has over 16 campuses and it has a very wide geographical spread and footprint, has more female students in all areas than their male counterpart. But what is even more interesting is in the fields in which these women are going into. So for example, if we look at the creatives, like that was just previously mentioned, like in media and applied media specifically, we have 80% of the students are female, while 12% are male. We look at in business, for example, in my college, 74% are women. In computer science, where you would think, predominantly male, 63% are female. And engineering, the colleges where predominantly anywhere in the world are male dominated. We have 45% of the college is female, and the numbers go on and on and on. This shows, this is not only in higher colleges of technology, at United Arab University, the female undergraduate representation is over 78% in 2022. And there's a United Nations development report that says, which is dated 2018, that says the average women in the UAE workforce is better educated than the average male by the ratios are 43% for women and 23% for the male. So I think overall the UAE has done a fantastic job in educating the women and closing that gap. So I think that's one area that we can safely say that we've squared away. And the UAE is ranked 67 and number 1 in the world for our female political participation, which of course is to a large extent also a byproduct of education. Same thing with employment.
Okay, that was absolutely fascinating and inspiring to know what a country can do when it ensures everyone has an equal opportunity to education and what that means for the workforce. So I'd love to understand better, building on what Simona said about gender equity in the workplace. What needs to change to ensure companies leverage the talents and expertise that your female graduates are exemplifying as both leaders and employees?
So first of all, coming back to what education has done, it has translated into women, of course, entering the workforce in large numbers. So UAE, in terms, is one of the few Arab countries that top the league when it comes to labor participation of women. We've got laws that protect women when in employment. I'm very pleased to say that the UAE also has signed a law that provides equal pay for men and women when they're doing the same jobs. Women are entitled to maternity benefits. But I think what is very, very important when we think about the role that women can play, and especially, our students, for example, our graduates, is I always tell my students that when you graduate, you're going to compete in a global economy. This economy is open to everyone. So you will have graduates from all over the world. So you're not going to get a job or you shouldn't plan to get a job because you're Emirati, but you should get a job because of your talents, your achievement. And this is very, very important, because then we focus not only on, teaching these students technical skills, which is important, of course, but we also focus on 21st century skills, and which includes creativity, critical thinking. It includes perseverance, collaboration, empathy, and we also focus on leadership. But these are trades that are really innate to women to a large extent, so they can leverage these skills. But a very important thing that also has happened is, and which will also help women in the workforce, is the pandemic. And some of my other colleagues, panelists, have talked about this, and this is how companies have changed the way they work. And I think the big winners in the coming years and even decades to come will be women, because what has happened is women who traditionally dropped out of the workforce because they have to look after, they always have to make that trade-off between, caregiving, and whether it's their children or their elderly parents or sick family members. The blunt of caregiving is always the women's responsibility, especially in our society, and I suppose globally too. So with the COVID-19 and the ability to be able to work flexibly and to work from home, not only will they get more opportunities, but I think what will happen is many more women who could not access the workforce will now enter the workforce. Now, when it comes to really what can we do in terms of encouraging women to enter the workforce and encourage them to be more active participants, I think one very important factor is actually providing quality childcare and support and to women, so that they can actually hop in and out of their careers without actually disrupting it. The flexi hours we talked about, and how this is going to enhance their productivity. Another important area is also giving women more representation when it comes to positions, whether it's in boards or senior level appointments, and really giving women opportunity, not so much as a quota, but because women can actually do the job, and because they've got the educational attainment, they've got the creativity, they've got the skills that it takes to be able to do that. Another important thing I think that would help women is more mentorship arrangement to advance women's careers. So women having role models, and these, of course, mentorship doesn't have to be female, but it can also be male, so that they can get opportunity to access to move up their careers and to increase their possibilities of upward mobility in their jobs.
And Dr. Abdullah, I love your comment about men and women working together to ensure everyone has an equal opportunity to contribute and benefit from inclusive growth. And I'd like to finally ask you, for those women who are interested in starting their own business, what needs to change within the entrepreneurial ecosystem? And I definitely want to know your insights into that, and then also open it up to the other panelists who also have expertise in entrepreneurship and business ownership. But I'd love to start with you, Dr. Abdullah.
Yeah, I think that's very, very important, because as we see shrinking of economies across the globe, and because of women and their roles in societies, Entrepreneurship is going to give them that flexibility. They can control their working hours. It will create, of course, economic development, and they are more likely, of course, all the studies show that women, when they're employed, their earnings are mainly go towards their family, to improving the well-being of their societies and their communities, and mostly their children, and which of course are the future assets of any nation. In the UAE, I'm very pleased to say the government has taken a central role in encouraging entrepreneurship across the board, whether it's for males or females, and they have been exceptionally supportive, and by creating many organizations that cater to entrepreneurship. One of which is, for example, in Dubai, we have the Dubai SME, which offers financing options. They provide advisory role for entrepreneurs. They provide incubators for startups. We have Sheikh Khalifa Fund that provides funding. And even at the universities, like for example, in higher colleges of technology, we have an innovation center, which we call incubation centers, which are incubators where we incubate companies that are coming from the ideas of our students and our faculty. And we have many companies that are licensed under this incubators that we provide locally in the university. And what we want to be able to do there is to be able to encourage these, especially young, and by the way, majority of these entrepreneurs are women, is to encourage them to to take off and to help them with their businesses. But coming to what needs to change, I think the other panelists have already mentioned this, but I think the key thing is changing mindset and perception of what roles, who is an entrepreneur. Should it only be, because the image that women mainly see is male entrepreneurs. So changing that unconscious bias that exists in our societies is very important, to see women in key roles, to see positive role models, but also to change even something like what we're experimenting with is to see how we can showcase women successful entrepreneurs, in not only in bringing them as guest speakers to the university so that our young ladies can be inspired, but also using them in case studies, for example, telling their stories, their successes, their challenges, their trials and tribulations. These are important for these women to see, and so that we can build this confidence among the young women in university settings, for example, so that they can become successful entrepreneurs. But also, again, because we're in the fourth industrial revolution and economy, where technology, science, math, engineering is really the engine for growth, it's important that we instill that in women, this is not so much for the UAE, but across the globe, really encourage young women to go into these fields by creating like Miss Math, Miss, a champion for IT engineering. So these young women can see that it is it's possible and you can succeed in these industries. The good news is that, especially in the Arab world, where always the image is not very positive when it comes to women empowerment, is I was just reading a report on startups just the other day, and it said 1 in 3 startups that is founded in the Arab world are founded by women or led by women, which is much higher than the statistics you will find in Silicon Valley, which I think is really great. I mean, the whole entrepreneurship idea for women is important, but I think it also helps women in, for example, in the UAE. What we're trying to do is, especially among our students that come from, some of them, our students come from really rural areas, and we want to be able to keep them in their communities, but use technology so that they can start their own businesses. and be, you know, contributing members in their communities, and as well create economic growth and economic impact in their communities, rather than them, you know, getting up, you know, and uprooting themselves and moving to big cities to find jobs. A very important one is also mentorship. I think that's, especially in entrepreneurship, it's membership. Mentorship is everything, because it's not what you learn in textbooks and in schools, but it's the school of hard knocks. It's where you know, talking to another entrepreneur, getting their input into what worked for them and what doesn't work, getting, you know, they become sounding boards for these young entrepreneurs, whether they're men and women. And I wouldn't, like I said before, wouldn't restrict mentorship only to women. I think it's good to have women mentorship, but it's also important to involve men, because the reality of the situation is many of these entrepreneurs and also the financing and a lot of the power structure are still very much within in the male arena.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Abdullah, I apologize. We're now over time. So I just wanted an opportunity to thank you once again for the brilliant work that you do, your passion, your leadership. Same thing for you, Simona. Same thing for you, Noah, and our other speakers. I learned so much today, and I have so much hope for where we go next. In spite of the pandemic, I see huge opportunity because of the leadership that was just demonstrated in this last hour. Thank you again to the organizers for the International Humanitarian Summit. We really appreciate you bringing us all together to provide hope and inspiration and clear suggestions for what actions can be taken. So I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day, no matter what time zone you're in. And thank you once again for being such powerful leaders.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.